Thank you, John. Gosh, what a great gathering. Obviously, the fabulous Susie Orbach and colleagues from across the globe, lots of different parts of the world. Lovely to, can't see everybody, but lovely to be in this gathering with everybody. And I think you've seen the title of this gathering. It's about the contribution of psychotherapy to wider social change. And Kate and I we have some questions to put to Susie, and also there'll be an organic flow, I think, that comes out of how Susie, me and Kate interact. And Kate, if you're okay, I'd love to just start by saying that Susie, and Kate knows this, but Susie, you were hugely influential on me as a young woman around body issues, body image, women's psychology. And I'm going to read just a little bit from the front of Fat as a Feminist Issue, a book that you did. And it says a little bit about you. I imagine everybody here knows quite a bit about you.
Yeah, really. Why do you need it?
Well, you know what? I can leave that. I can absolutely leave that. But I will read another bit.
Okay.
which is less about you and about about you and Louise Eichenbaum said in your fabulous book, What Do Women Want? And it's well into the book, page 193, and you say, which is absolutely spot on for us, and what this group, I think, this wider community is about in relation to social change. But you say this idea that social change is slow, painstaking, essential, and potentially progressive seems very pertinent for our conversation today. Really, absolutely relevant. And you were talking about that in a particular context, but it's relevant to general social change. Kate, did you want to add anything in that kind of welcoming bit before we move into questions?
Do you know, I would love to say lots of things, but Susie, I think our audience aren't here to hear what Lynne and I have to say. They're more interested in you. So I won't take the opportunity. I'm just going to say I'm thrilled to meet you. Yeah, and I think what's really important is to kind of allow us to explore the relationship between what you have done throughout your career and its social impact and the way that it's changed us. I think it changed us in the immediate and changed us in the long term. So welcome.
Thank you.
Yeah, wonderful. And you're right, Kate, the audience will want Susie. That's what we're all here for. That sounds awful, but they want engagement with you and to hear about you. So yeah, it's a mix of about social change and your influence on that, and perhaps one or two, not deeply personal questions, but questions about you and your career.
Fine, go ahead.
So I'm going to kick us off with what kind of social change have you noticed more generally in your career, both positive and negative?
Well, it's a really good question, because I don't think the scorecard stacks up in the progressive domain, at least not in the last 10 years at all. Well, I don't think it stacks up since Thatcher, but there are things that have really changed, which is there's much more awareness of social costs, of racism, of the whole scope of gender issues, and the fact that poverty and class are bad for everybody. I think that is kind of that's a little bit of what is in the culture. It's denied all the time, but it's also there at the same time. I think there's so much challenge to what is, and a lot of it doesn't come from progressive causes. It comes from the libertarian right. But nevertheless, it's speaking to the fact that our world doesn't work the way it was constituted. And it's not working right now very well. So I don't feel optimistic, but I think there have been enormous changes in terms of, you know, an Irish woman being excluded from her family because she had a baby and her husband left her, right? That just doesn't happen in Ireland anymore. It doesn't happen in the UK. It doesn't happen. It doesn't happen in Europe. It happens in all sorts of other bits of the world, but it's not part of a discourse of criticism. We don't allow it anymore.
Yeah, absolutely. And that
also maternality, I think, is on the table as something important. Like when I was growing up, we used to put it down before feminism. Women, what would they want to do? They're talking about babies and kids and with such contempt as a very young woman. I remember being so, if you like, male identified, and then thinking, wait a minute, how did that happen? This is completely central to how we're constituted as a society, how we position the reproductive life and the reproduction of life and who does it and how it's done. So I guess there's a lot of things I guess we can be positive about.
So some good things have come about. Yeah. You brought in the kind of politics, and I guess some of the politics have changed, and certainly there'll be different systems because we've got viewers and folks in the gathering, Susie, from across the globe. So people from lots of different kinds, I guess, of political arenas. But you've raised some of the challenges that women might have faced, particularly.
Well, I think they're facing it tremendously in North America, and that's just a harbinger for other countries. I mean, it's certainly a harbinger for Hungary. It's certainly really difficult in parts of the Middle East and Africa. Women's bodies are sites of struggle, whether they're used as a weapon in war or whether they're used as a weapon in reproductive rights. Or whether you can just the fact that it's okay to threaten, and it's okay to be an ex-president of the United States who is not only convicted of sexual assault but bragged about it.
Yeah,
in his campaign. There's something really disturbing about our political system that is allowed to stand.
Yeah. And it happens across the globe. Kate, sorry, you're coming in there.
I feel really powerfully about this idea that actually the political systems are wrought through women's bodies. So we're the kind of tool of politicization, even though the politics has changed and the narratives have changed going forward. And I'm just interested you don't sound awfully hopeful, Susie.
I don't feel hopeful. When I thought about the title, Kate, of this event, I thought, actually, it feels like, given the hope of second generation feminists, we failed at a profound level. We've made therapy a lot more accessible. We brought that out of the closet. We changed aspects of what therapy does. It doesn't talk about in a patronizing way about, well, a lot of mainstream still does, but a lot of it doesn't, about empty nest or depressed women or whatever. But no, I think you're absolutely right. It's when you see that a woman giving a woman who has cancer, who's pregnant, that her baby's health can trump her right to treatment, which is the situation in certain North American states. You think this is barbaric, actually. The concern for the unborn child until they're born, and then there is no concern for them whatsoever.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And that level of judgment it feels to me like it's getting worse. I don't know. I feel like it's more dangerous. So, as always, as you grow older, you become a little bit more cynical. But do you find that's actually, do you see the going backwards in America?
I see going in a really totally different direction. I see what we can hope for is some kind of split within the Republican Party, because the women actually do want the right to abortion. And it was completely opportunist that the Republicans took up anti-abortion, 30, 40 years ago. It wasn't their view then. So I don't know that we're going back to something. I think we're going forward into some terrible forms of rhetoric and fundamentalism, which I think belie the complexity that is each of us as human beings and each of our communities.
Yeah.
And I think, boys are offered a rotten state of affairs too. I don't think this is just about girls and women at all.
Yeah, it's not just about girls at all, Susie, as you say. And obviously we've got lots of different people in the audience. I don't know exactly who's with us, but it's good to hear you say that, bringing in men's psychology. So in terms of the counselling or psychological professions, including psychotherapy, what do you think are the challenges for us collectively, Susie, in terms of change, social change, political change?
Well, I guess it depends on what we're trying to do. I mean, do we really think that providing short-term manualized therapy to people who are unemployed is a solution? I don't. I think it's a form of social control. As sort of like it's not. It may be helpful, but it certainly oughtn't to be where we're directed. And I think psychotherapy, I mean, it's ridiculous. It sounds idealist to say it should live within our National Health Service, because it was there, it was destroyed. Now psychotherapy, I mean, it's very hard to get any CAMHS work if you've got adolescent kids who are in difficulty. And God knows, any of us would be in difficulty if we were adolescents today, I think. There's very little access possible. And what there is often in units that are privatized, that sell their services and are badged as NHS. And, do I like the nice guidelines on therapy? No, I don't. Do I think that's a progressive form of therapy? No, I don't. Do I think we need more options for people to talk together, but both one-to-one? I mean, I think one of the things we discovered at the Women's Therapy Centre was people did want to be in groups around specific issues, and it increased the feeling of being understood in collegiality and not being so frightened and knowing that everybody else was frightened. Yeah. People also wanted to be in individual therapy, so and people didn't want to be in long-term therapy all the time. They might have wanted some kind of theme-centered stuff on how you challenge some of the conundrums of contemporary society. So we have all sorts of skills within our profession, from eco-psychology to specific services for non-binary therapy, all of that, or for trauma therapy, all of which I think is very interesting, but it's very hard for people to access it unless they know what they're doing.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I'm really being a bit of a downer, but I feel very, very concerned about the state of the world. And whereas I think therapy is a phenomenally rich resource, it tells us society secrets, right? It tells us what's wrong. It's an unparalleled sight of seeing people in the process of change. It is one of the best forms of understanding what makes people active and able to act on their own behalf. And all of that is ignored by partly our fault, partly therapists' fault, because we don't go argue in government and all of that, but is sort of ignored by other kinds of specialties, which are much more diminished or thinner than what I think we have to offer. I don't think behavioral economics, for example, kind of gets the depth of what the psychotherapy ear is able to convey and what listening is able to do. I think That's very different than manipulating a set of behaviors.
Susie, I just want to say that someone, there's lots of great comments coming in, really great comments coming in from the audience. I'm just delighted on one, somebody saying here, people are all different needs. So good to hear Susie speaking the truth. So you are really very powerfully naming the dire.
But I think we all can. I mean, that is the point.
Yeah,
we sit in our rooms, wherever they're located. We meet people with so many different understandings of themselves. I mean, each one of us has complex and multiple understandings of ourselves. And, you know, if I can quote Karl Marx, the individual is the ensemble of social relations. That is what we are. We understand. And the reason we know this is because we're there to listen. And I think the problem is we don't have the right way to output it back to the world.
Okay, Susie,
in terms of social policy.
I'm going to put you on the spot. Sorry, Susie. So we haven't got the right ways. What can we do? How can we rectify that? What actions or groupings or anything that
Well, I think there's so many different ways. I mean, I could start at the beginning of life. I could go to the end of life. I mean, if I was starting at the beginning of life, I would be providing mental health services to expectant mums or expectant parents, because not only do I not want them to pass on their body troubles, which are kind of the way that you are in the world now, to the next generation, I want to meet them and their interest and fears and longings and desires for how their children can make a world and how they can make it with them, right? So I think, you know, in school, I would change the curriculum. So without being a feeling fascist, I would definitely be interested in teachers understanding something about emotional literacy. I think that it's not that I don't think that yoga is important, which some schools are doing, or running, but I actually think being able to hear what kids are saying. I mean, teachers are passionate people, and they want to be as excellent as they can. I think looking at fears of education, fears of doing well, what is there in the world, you know, kids' fears about the state of the world that we've left it in. I mean, I could go anywhere. I could go to the civil service and talk about what it would mean to have a psychotherapist on every committee, just like you have other technical skills, statisticians and engineers, you know, so that when they're thinking about a women's refuge, they don't understand why women go back to abusive relationships. There's somebody who could explain that to them, that it isn't because the women are crazy. It isn't because they're weak. It's because they think they're doing something in that relationship. Women's psychology, as currently constituted, means that we think we can care and fix too much, and all of those kinds of things. And how would we bring children up so boys learn how to actually hear and girls learn how to receive? I mean, there's so much I could go on about.
Absolutely. Kate, sorry.
Yes, it sounds, Susie, I love what you're saying. It sounds like the way that therapy can make a difference is actually having a little bit more confidence in the wisdom of the therapy room and disseminating that. So enabling those conversations.
Absolutely. I mean, I remember when I wrote Fifi and then subsequently other books, the profession was really snooty. It was like, why are you talking, particularly when I wrote Impossibility of Sex, why are you talking about the secrets of the consulting room? As though we were sort of some arcane practice, like, look, where we had to invent a language so nobody could learn it, as opposed to this. I think we have social responsibility to share. There's many, many ways to share what we're learning. And we do, the therapy room is our lab. That is what we have. It is a place for understanding and theorizing, as well as transforming.
Yeah.
And so you've done that. Sorry, Lynne.
I'm just keeping an eye on the comments coming in. We've got some fantastic thoughts being expressed.
I'm going to say one more thing, and then we can maybe respond to the chat. I'm sorry. So Susie, you're one of the few people who have actually done that. You've translated what's happening in the therapy room and impacted massively on society, on the way people understand the world, and provided suggestions for how they change. But that's a hard thing, I think, to do. I wonder if you have any thoughts on how that felt, maybe at the time when you're doing Fifi, but also now. How do you find that ability to translate?
Well, I think I'm really blessed by not liking technical language. I mean, I don't mind it if I'm talking to somebody who I know is exactly on the same page. But what I'm really interested in is what's the texture of feeling, and how does that relate to world and local events, and then family events or whatever. I think you just have to sit there till you find les mots justes. I mean, I think it's hard. I never wrote except in A levels, because you had to. And I've always avoided school essays. And then I realized, well, if I didn't really have anything to say. Now I have things to say about how Brexit might be affecting people, or how debates on gender, right? So once you have something to say, I think we have an obligation to say it in English.
Yes.
Yeah.
And to use passionate language. There's nothing wrong with we're very passionate people, therapists. And, we're not uptight. I know that's the image, that we're all uptight and so controlled and all of that. But inside of ourselves, we're very, I think, deeply passionate.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's what I guess I bring to the writing. I don't know if it comes across passionate, but a passion to explain what I think I've understood.
Yeah, and I think your idea about a therapist on every committee went down well.
Well, Andrew Samuels, who's a Jungian therapist, and we both started Psychotherapists and Counselors for Social Responsibility maybe 25 years ago.
Yeah,
it was part of our rallying call. And I learned a lot, because I did get to be on a committee, but it was only one committee or two committees when in the coalition government. And I learned a lot about what you need to do, which is you need to really press very hard on the civil servants, because because I remember apologizing to them for being sort of hardball about something. And they said, no, if you're not, then we just tell the minister everything's okay. But if we can say, sorry, committee members aren't accepting this needs to go like this, that gives them some power, some ballast. So I learned that little piece, but that's about it.
Yeah. I think, Kate, we should start really looking into the comments. People are coming up with some amazing comments. I'm just delighted on, I think it's from Andrew.
I'm just looking at a question now from...
I thought the one that just came up about our training is a
yes, I was just delighted on that one. Yeah,
really significant, because I know that we tried to create a curriculum that actually situated where psychotherapy came from in its social moment. Why psychotherapy? Why psychoanalysis at exactly the same moment as you're getting the first phase of women's liberation, and you're getting a challenge to class societies just before the Russian Revolution, etc., right?
Yeah.
We've never taught that. We're taught it as a canon. And I think this isn't true in counseling courses, but in the more psychoanalytic side, we're not taught to question, and we're not taught to contextualize. And I think it's to the detriment of trainees and to the current profession.
Absolutely. I think Andrew embedded a comment on that by saying, I think so many therapists hold the position that politics have no place in the room.
But everything is political. I mean, the way you hear something is political, but the way you intervene is also political, right? Even from whether you're on the side of the person, right? Because a lot of people don't think they're on the side of the patient. I am, or the client, whatever word we're going to use, because there's no, for me, satisfactory word at all. But from my point of view, I'm really interested to be in them with their struggle, but from the perspective of being a therapist. And that is already a political statement, let alone how did they develop sufficient, how do you understand their defense structure or the way they operate that means that they're reinforcing the forms of subordination that they don't want to be doing? And how do you make that visible to them? And how do you help them see that for themselves so that they have an interest in transformation? All of that is political. I mean,
Absolutely.
And I think there's something around that positioning. So a few people would sort of say, yes, I am political. Actually, this is something that happens. But I wonder if it's something about balancing the personal political with the therapeutic political, and then the client political. So how do you sort of navigate yourself within that?
I think that's a good question, and I don't think we could answer that unless we each took a few of the people we see and we discussed what we thought was going on. Because we don't take that as a project, so we don't really know, right? We have our experience, which we then think is as instinctive at this point because we're experienced, but it would be worth trying to really understand that. And I think people are so scared of instruction, as though we're going to be doing a normal kind of conversation, which of course is part of therapy. I mean, doesn't matter, it is part of therapy.
Yeah.
But I don't think it's at all interesting when people are coming in around Trump or Brexit and were distressed to not be empathic to that. I think that's absolutely bonkers. To make it about them, as opposed to have that received in an important relationship.
Yeah, and Susie, someone called Carolyn Strobos has come in saying we work alone most of the time. We do not know how to become part of a group that has influence. Not many of us write or join committees. So I guess it's that, how do we organize ourselves? And I know Mick Cooper and John Wilson, who host this group, you know, they're encouraging those questions and ideas. It's how do we organize ourselves? How do each of us as activists, and also each of us in groups are activists? You said earlier we have an obligation, so it's like, how do we fulfill that obligation?
Yeah, I think they're difficult questions. You two are both placed in institutions, so in a way that helps. Right, and you're fostering the idea that you're a community of thinkers and feelers, right? And that is something that should go on after somebody's training has finished.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean they're necessarily going to all want to be activists. But I think most people are appalled by it. I mean, when the BMI came in for children, I remember we had, big demonstrations in New York against New York City schools, and also here, because it had nothing to do with the development of children's well-being. It was just simply a stick to manage something that the health service brought in for no good reason. I mean, actually for a very good reason. It was supported by the diet industry and et cetera, but I'm not going into that. But I think we need places to talk about the outrages we're seeing. I mean, this week I thought, I had 3 women in a row that I've been seeing for a while, incredibly capable. And I felt enormous sorrow because I felt they've been stranded in their lives. And it's not clear why. I mean, it is obviously clear why, because of childcare and the way that education is now. You've got to do everything for the kid and all of that, or the kids. But I felt like we're meeting the same problem, the problem that Betty Friedan said had no name, from the 1970s, that there's a rhetoric of everything's possible, but there's no recognition of how scary it is, or the fact that ambition needs to be mixed in with the knowledge that it's quite hard to do. It's struggle. It isn't all sweetness and light. It's complicated.
Yeah.
You know, we're not really sure we're meant to take up that space. We're still not sure because we're still being told we shouldn't.
The space we're allowed to take up has changed, I think.
Yes.
There's something there. There's a few comments about the sort of the problems that are faced by people who are training and the cost of therapy. But I think there's something around us acting as individuals in therapy, which is not simply in the therapy room, but actually it's that pressure that we have that everything is our own responsibility. It relates a little to the way you spoke about, you know, our responsibility for our bodies, but actually what is available for us to be responsible for is impacted hugely by the context. So if we're acting politically as therapists, there has to be somewhere we can do this. There have to be people who will listen to us, and that also there has to be some tension with that consensus. Do we all agree?
I think that's really right, but I think that's where people who come from a counselling background actually are much better, because in their training there is much more about reciprocity and mutuality and listening. I mean, I think within my part of psychotherapy, it's all about the narcissism of small differences and not really agreeing with each other, right? Inside or outside the consulting room. And it's a profession that was so hidden that it's not surprising that there were splits in it. And what's really required, I think, is leadership from the counseling psychotherapy side rather than the analytic side, which numbers so few people, frankly. Because I think you have more tools, and also many more counseling programs are situated in academic institutions. They're not not entirely in sort of private institutions, which can become cultish. But I think it does. What are our responsibilities? I think that needs to be, what is the responsibility? You know, would that be a part of the curriculum in the 3rd year or the 4th year or whatever it is? What are our responsibilities? How are we going? What do we need to give to society about what we're learning? In what forms? I think that would be a really interesting project, frankly.
A few people have mentioned Psychologists for Social Change, which is an activist group or a group that are championing social change, Susie. And I know you mentioned Andrew Samuels earlier. I think he's been quite a force, particularly
not in that. He's been a force. We've been a force together, I think, in
yes.
Psychotherapy and Counsellors for Social Responsibility, which is a slightly different way. But yes, why are we all in these different groups? That in itself is because we come from different professions, right? But it's good that we have all these groups, including this group. I mean, the hunger is here for us to make a contribution.
It is.
You know, the post-World War II settlement was about making a contribution. It wasn't about being turned into consumers. And I think we still want to make a contribution. And we need to be argued with, because, you know, we can be very arrogant about our forms of knowledge.
Susie, do we need politicians who are psychotherapists, counsellors?
What do you think?
I do. I've tried to persuade Mick Cooper, but I think he's got other plans for life. But seriously, there's something, I wonder, is there something about that thing about being in it to change it?
Yeah, I think that, I mean, I think the level of compromise you have to make as a politician, particularly with party control as it is, or has been for the last period, is extraordinarily difficult.
Yeah.
And we know the cost of compromise, right? We know how corrosive it is.
Yeah.
It would be very interesting to have somebody from the inside talk about what that cost is. and what it means to think that you're a representative, and yet you've got to toe a line that may be so narrow and so damn uninteresting. I mean, I think it's an interesting, I definitely, I'm sure there are, though, I'm sure some of the Scandi countries have psychotherapists who are politicians. I can't imagine they don't.
I'm sure they do. We've had an interesting question for you, Susie, from Gillian Proctor. How do you cope with the responsibility for the power of what you say? Do you ever worry you get it wrong?
You mean in my interpersonal or in public?
I think land where you choose to.
Well, of course I worry that I get things wrong, but more I think of life as a development, isn't it? It's not, we're not static, but I think having a reasonable grounding in understanding something about the social world, even and the economic world, even while it's changed to turbo capitalism, or whatever we want to call this right now, because it is so to late capital, means that you are having to revise what you say. But I think the fundamentals about how you might approach a problem are useful, and then you learn things from other people all the time. So don't spend a lot of time thinking I got that wrong, probably more interpersonally than I do to the world, because hey, nobody's really listening to me. I mean, it feels that they might read things, but they're not really listening, right? I mean, it's not, we affect each other in so many different ways, and if I say something stupid, they'll just say, oh, she said something stupid.
I think probably people choose what they want to hear.
Absolutely.
In terms of what you're saying. I do wonder that it leads on to the question that we now have within society, apparent freedom of speech, but a very divisive response if you say something which is unpopular, or say something which is against the popular grain, and there's moral judgments behind that. So does that ever affect?
Yeah, I feel very suspicious about what I think is often led by the libertarian right. I'm not at all convinced that free speech is the way we ought to think about discourse, because free speech without the condemnation of hate and aggression and racism and class hatred and gender hatreds, no, not okay by me. And the question it begs for us is, why do these organs, why does TikTok or Twitter or whatever, what is it that people are needing to say that gets expressed in those terms? What is it in terms of not being able to hold an idea long enough when one's outraged? One of the things I think that was so brilliant about the political movement Occupy, I don't know if you were aware of it or participated, but both in the two cities that I participated in Occupy, one outside St. Paul's and one at Wall Street, is that participants formed a circle and they became human microphones. And so somebody would say they wanted to speak, and they would say then what they wanted to say, and then the person behind would repeat it, and then the person behind, there was no megaphone, they were human megaphones, and the person behind would say it, and so on until everybody heard it. And I think what was really interesting about that was having to embody words that you didn't agree with, and it gave you enough time to actually think about them, because it was a political process where you didn't just go, that's crap, right? Or, you know, no. It was, and I think there was something in that process of daring to think what other people, now, okay, these were people who are on the progressive side, but there are many, many divisions within that. But I thought that that is a political moment, and as a political practice was really interesting, because embodying something, because language is embodiment, allowed one to take a bit more of the subtlety of the argument, or to see what you could agree with there, as well as what you balked at.
Wait and see how you resonate with what's being said.
Correct.
And find out about that.
Which I don't think happens now, because you just go boom, right? I mean, I'd be very scared to reply to anything on the Twitter myself. Because I don't think it's a marketplace of, I'm sure it's wonderful for all sorts of things, but it's also a marketplace of hate.
Yes.
Definitely.
Yeah. Powerfully silencing. Sorry, Lynne.
I just want to acknowledge that there are so many, everyone's making really important comments, valuable comments, commenting about you, praising your ideas and what you're saying. And someone's come back in again about training and about the need to integrate social, psychological and sociological theory into therapy training.
But you two are located in a position to do that, right? Which is great.
Yeah.
I think to some degree we sit within higher education, which means that we don't have entire freedom.
Yeah, but you have, but the whole point of the academy is to bring in criticism, isn't it?
It is. Susie, there's a question. Languages embodiments. Can you say more about what you mean?
Well, part of the work that I got interested in is because of what's happened to the body, is thinking about the body in terms of its own history. And I don't mean in terms of the sort of Van der Kolk traumatic history, although I wouldn't disagree with that. But I think that in the psychotherapy field, including the body therapist, the focus is on the mind, what has been dumped on the body that can't be handled by the mind. I mean, that's the beginning of psychoanalysis. That's hysterical symptoms, right? And I've been very interested in looking at, as bodies have been targeted by commercial operations and by visual culture and by what's happened since, what we spend on the body is just phenomenal, big industries. But what I've been very interested in is, well, we always think of the mind as trumping the body, but what if the body history is disturbed? That in the very early introduction to the body, particularly at this point where people are encouraged to get back into or they imagine they should get back in their blue jeans immediately they've given birth, or they should be running, or they mustn't gain any weight. The site of nurture and bonding is really complex. And what I think may be inadvertently conveyed is disturbed bodies to the next generation. So I've been thinking a lot about, we need new theories of embodiment, but also how bodies are deconstructing, particularly girls, but also boys' sense of self. And I want to include in that people who are non-binary. But suppose what I also want to say is that speech, because this is where it came from, I think, about 10 minutes ago, it's both physical and mental, and it's spontaneous in a way that, tone and everything about voice is about embodiment, I think. So in bodies, I've written about wanting to have a new theory of how we get a body, and that we get a body from those whose bodies have related to our bodies, and those bodies have been raised by cultures which are now quite poisonous towards bodies, so that we now grow up with distressed bodies that become very available for manipulation or for transformation or for etc. etc. So I think that's briefly what I was trying to talk about or alluding to.
Okay, thanks, Susie. And someone I think has asked if you've written about bodies. I know some of your earlier work has been.
No, but also I've written, there's a book, and a recent edition is called Bodies. And
Right.
it's a whole argument about this. And
Yeah.
I wrote it in maybe 11, and I republished it in 2019 or 2016. So get the later edition, because it has much more about, and it's got a lot of it's got material in it that I think people might like, because it talks about the impact of what it means to grow up with a troubled body.
Mm.
And that it's not fun. It's not fun at all. It's not postmodern pleasure, you know?
I think if I could say, Susie, one of the most useful things I think in the newer edition of Bodies is that you address some of the transgender questions which are around with real empathy, and I thought that was lovely.
You know, that was my first job when I was training. So although in those days it wasn't called transgender particularly, it was called transvestites, although some people were also transitional.
Excuse
So
me.
thank you for noticing that.
So I did my homework. There's something also about that idea of intergenerational embodiment that I think is really important, and then that it seems to be extending the understanding of the causation of problems as well.
Yes, and without blaming the generation that's visiting it on their kids, right? But also, I think what's interesting for us as therapists is that just as we get to have a very sane psyche in the room, however, whether we've had a row with somebody the minute before or whatever, and we also get to have a very sane body in the room. I mean, we might get a disturbed body in the countertransference, but we get to work on what's disturbing us and why. And our bodies can become an anchor, just like our psyches, for the people that we're working with. And I think, one of the big secrets of therapy is how we get to always be processing things for ourselves and hopefully getting better. So I think bodies are really crucial as bodies, not simply as a place we dump things.
So it sounds like, Susie, getting or looking at your book on cold bodies would be helpful for.
Should be on your training courses.
Yeah. A lot coming up about training, about perhaps some trainees feeling silenced in part of the training and not able to challenge tutors, things like that. So I think your conversation is raising lots of questions, as well as possible ideas for moving forward. And
I mean,
and
it's ridiculous. If you're
do.
taking geography, you would question it.
Yeah.
The silence. I know what we're doing is taking people's lives in our hands, but that's really why we should be asking questions.
Absolutely. I'm aware of our time, Susie, and don't want you to drop off the cliff at 6 o'clock.
Okay.
And I guess this is a kind of a question to Mick and John, but there's some rich content in the chat, and I wonder what will happen to that. Will that continue to be available for Susie to have a look at, Mick or John? Yes, John's saying yes, absolutely.
But what about the community of people who are drawn to the topic? I mean, is that something that
I think
Al will be able to?
I think what we need to do is capture, because in the last hour, Susie, we have danced over so many really important points. I think what we need to try and do is capture those for the community that are in the audience today, and really get people, because it seems to me there are things that people want done, there are things that people want changed, there are questions around how do we do this. There's certainly passion coming across, so yes, I think I'm speaking to the audience now as well as you, and saying that we'll find some way of bringing it together.
Definitely.
Yeah, and I think what's interesting is it's also what people want to do. People want to contribute to change in their right. It's
feeling stuck on how.
Yeah, which is okay. We're going to learn. We're going to make lots of mistakes, but nevertheless, this is a lot of people wanting to participate.
Yeah. Someone called Anna, who's twice been in the chat, I think she's conveying. Sorry, Anna, and sorry to everyone, because it's difficult to keep our eyes on every single comment. And but Anna's asking about setting up a low-cost centre. And I know, Anna, that many people have done that. People do their training, they get a bit of experience, and then they work together, sometimes in like cooperatives. But Anna might have her own take on that. But that's a really good question, because that's something that you might want to do to enact social change and social justice and make it affordable, accessible, all of that. So really, really good.
I mean, when we started the Women's Therapy Centre, we had an absolute principal position on the first bit of funding that we simply weren't going to charge certain people. It wasn't, you know, that wasn't what we wanted to do. It wasn't that we believed that you have to get what you pay for. I mean, it's absolutely horrendous thing that seeps into the profession.
Yeah. There's a lot of activism and people wanting to be active coming forward. And this is a question, I guess, for the social change group, and maybe for the final half hour that the social change group will be convening. But it's about, can we get attendees into interest groups? Because in the chat there are a number of themes coming through, and that was from Cindy. Yeah, she wants to share her experience in supporting activists.
That's great.
Yeah.
Can I ask you one final question, Susie? Just again, this is a selfish one. I'm doing this a lot. And I train therapists, and Lynne does too. If there was one thing that you would insert into a therapy training course that you feel would be really like essential, that you feel maybe don't do just yet, I've put you on the spot. I'm sorry.
I'd like to look at the curriculum and then I tell you.
Okay. Well, thank you for that.
Right, because the main thing I want is for people to be able to understand where the stuff they're learning has come from.
Okay.
The historical moment, the why of it. But I also want them to be able to critique it. But I'm sure there's other stuff I'd love to put in.
Okay, I should have given you some warning, but something of that. How did we come to this knowledge that we have, rather than just simply imparting it as some kind of abstract truth?
Yeah.
So, Kate and Susie, some great stuff coming through in the chat about decolonization, capitalization. You know, we have to look at all of these really important things.
And we're outliers now, because it's a big enough group of people, and therapy is everywhere now, and we should be pushing for the kind of therapy we think is important, and for provision to the people who need it.
Yes. You're an inspirational voice, Susie, and again, not wishing to put you on the spot, but I wonder if our group could keep in contact with you, just to let you know if we're managing any of this. Thank you.
I'd love it.
Brilliant.
That's very kind. Thank you very much.
I'm so sorry not to have talked with everybody else, but
well, Susie, can I just say that means you've got to come back.
Okay, all right.
For an absolute open forum, you'd have to come back. So
okay, delighted to.
That would be fabulous.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Susie, you rock, says Kaz.
Okay, thank you. Okay, thank you, everybody. And thank you to you two, and to Mick, and to the technicians. Thank you, everybody.
All right, thanks, Susie.
Lovely to meet you.
Okay.
Yeah, lovely.
Bye.